it qualified as Pas Yisrael. So Pas Akum Leinesra Elam Kenoso Hanochri is Kol Masli Hafias HaPas. If the non-Jew did the entire process of baking the bread from A to Z, from 1 to 10, the whole thing, then it can become Pas Palta. If the Jew did one of the actual baking processes, Hainu, which means Yisroel Hivir Satanor, the Jew lit the fire of the oven, or Yisomes Halachem Batanor, or put the bread inside the oven, or Chita Begacholim, or stirred the coals, because by stoking the coals, you're also increasing the heat, right? That's how you actually activate the fire. That's also a contribution of fire. That would qualify to make the bread as Pas Yisrael. There's a further leniency with regards to Pas Hakum. Even if the Jew didn't do one of these things, they just threw in a twig. They took a twig, they threw it into a big flame, into the oven. Or blew onto the fire again, because that's increasing the heat. They kashered, meaning it's used metaphorically. They made the bread now Pas Yisrael because they have an involvement that's of significant nature. So there was a story, I think I mentioned this story. There was a Rav who was giving hechsher on a bakery. They did not allow him to make a Pas Yisrael, so he'd go in smoking a cigar that he lit, and he threw it into the flame. So that cigar that he lit, they threw into the flame, has the same halacha as a twig that you're throwing in. So that was a way of him to be mishtatif, to join into the baking process to make it Pas Yisrael. Because any type of contribution in addition to the flame helps the bread to be finished the baking process. It contributes to the baking process in a significant manner, and that's enough to make it Pas Yisrael. Now we turn the page. Some say that this whole thing about throwing in the twig is a leniency that we should only rely on when we have no other choices, when we're under duress. Now we're on the top of page Samach Beis. Meaning from the onset, the Jew should actually turn on the fire, or put the bread in the oven, or stir the coals. In other words, do something a little bit more involved. If the Jew does not do any one of these actions, then the bread would be considered to be pas palter or pas balabayas nochri. Okay, just want to mention something else now, which is very important. That of the choices we mentioned, which are namely, a Jew could put the bread in the oven, or you could stoke the coals, or you could turn on the fire or throw in a twig. Those are the halachically qualified and acceptable methods to make something Pas Yisrael. We said that the method of throwing in the twig is only something that should be done under duress if you have no other choice. Fine. But now I'm going to speak about from the practical side of things. It's always advisable for the Jew to light the fire, to turn on the oven. Why? Because if we're just relying on the fact that the Jew put the bread in the oven, so only that bread itself is affected by the Jew's involvement. But the next loaf that goes in is not. So in order to have a uniform system that's going to have long-lasting effect, we say the Jew should turn on the fire of the oven, turn on the oven itself, and then anything that's baked with the koyach, the power of that heat that the Jew turned on, is going to be Pas Yisrael. So systemically, we rely on the system of the Jew turning on the oven for that reason. Now, what about if you have some breads on the market that are known as par baked, right? So they sell the bread. The manufacturers, they bake these breads. They underbake them by, let's say, 10 or 20%. So when you're buying them, they're only 80 to 90% baked. And if you look at them, if a person's mamish starving and has nothing to eat, you could eat them probably and get by, but it's not something you would want to serve to your guests. It's still very white and complexion is still very chewy. So the question becomes, at what point do we say a bread is ready to be served and to be eaten, and a Jew can no longer make it Pas Yisrael? Because the halacha is that so long as the bread is not edible to eat yet, or you wouldn't serve it to your guests, then it means that there's still a necessity for further involvement in the baking process. If the Jew does that involvement, that would qualify to make it Pas Yisrael. So when you buy, for example, a par-baked bagel that's kosher par with a reliable hashgacha, you put it into your oven and it has to bake for another 10 minutes or 12 minutes, then you're going to make it Pas Yisrael. So this is a wonderful gift for shluchim that live all over the country, all over the world. They can buy products from national companies that are reliably certified, but they're not Pas Yisrael. If they're par baked and they can get them, they can bake off the baking process and make it Pas Yisrael. So this is a wonderful tool to use when in a situation where you can't get, we don't have the luxury of having like we have in Crown Heights. We have every bakery under the sun here. So just like we said, the Jews' involvement in the baking process qualifies for a Jew to make it Pas Yisrael, the beginning of the baking process, the middle, so too it also qualifies at the end of the baking process prior to its completion. The Jew baked bread entirely from A to Z without a Jew's involvement. Even if the food's ready to be eaten, now I'm going to say a loaded statement which needs to be clarified and explained because it can be easily misunderstood. There's a concept in halacha known as if you mashpiach the pas, if you're going to make the bread more tasty, more choice-worthy, better. For example, today's Friday. Tomorrow we're going to have cholent for those of you who eat cholent. So cholent could be ready when it's fully cooked after being on the fire, let's say for, 6 hours, 5 hours. But if you let it sit on the fire, slow cook for, let's say, 12 hours, it's called mitzdamek v'yafalei. It gets caramelized, it gets a little more geschmack. In Yiddish, you'd say gerot, and it gets more delicious. So we do have a concept known as something that could be ready to be eaten. It's fully cooked. But if you let it go further, it's a whole different product. A different experience. It's like in a family, they say, "Oh, the food burns." Some people are like, "Oh, perfect, it's ready." Depends on who you ask. So there is such a concept now. So in the Shulchan Aruch they bring this down, but the commentaries explain that this that we say, "Let's it's going to become mashpich, it's going to become better." Only only if it's going to make it ready, so to speak. Which means to say, if I have a bread that's, let's say, 90% baked, but it's still, let's say, a little chewy and it's white in complexion. So by me putting it into the oven for another, finish off that 10% for, let's say, 7, 8, 9 minutes, whatever it's going to take, if it's a smaller roll, if it's the bread, will probably take more, then that would qualify. But if something is ready to be served the way it is, you go to the store, you buy a loaf of bread, it's ready to be served. And then we're going to put it into the oven to toast it. That we say does not make it Pas Yisrael. Although, if someone's in a situation where they're going to be lenient and eat non-Pas Yisrael bread anyways, because halachically, it's permissible if you're in a place where you cannot get Pas Yisrael, even though we as Hasidim are stringent only to consume Pas Yisrael, like the Rebbe said to Rabbi Yislavsky Yechid, I said this a few weeks ago, that Hasidim and the Hasidim are very, very careful to eat only Pas Yisrael and Chol Yisrael. But halachically, pas halter is permissible if one cannot get Pas Yisrael. So if someone's in a situation where they're going to be lenient, we would advise them toast the bread, because toasting the bread gets you into the category of like the caramelized of cholent. It tastes more delicious for some people. Halachically, we don't actually say that that's going to make it Pas Yisrael, but it sort of elevates it a little bit spiritually. So it's an advisable thing to do if someone's going to have non-Pas Yisrael anyway. Yeah.
If we're baking bread in our kitchen and someone non-Jewish is there and accidentally sticks it in, we can just take it out and put it back in.
Or you can do even better. You can just raise the flame. Turn off the fire and turn it on. As long as you turn on the flame, it's not a problem. A non-Jew is allowed to put the bread in the oven. In fact, in many certified bakeries with hashgacha, reliable hashgacha, I'm in the industry. We the bakers are non-Jewish, but we have devices inside the oven that keep a burning flame on all the time, that the mashgiach turns on, and it's controlled in such a way which it cannot turn off. So I have a bakery, many bakeries like this, but one bakery in particular that has a system, and they manufacture hundreds of thousands of bagels in this way, and the flame is always on all the time. And the Jew comes there on their visits and raises the flame just to keep the Jew's involvement fresh, so to speak, to be mechadish the Yad Yisroel. And that qualifies. If the bread is fully baked, you go to the store, you buy a loaf of bread, it's ready to eat. It's not going to get more ready, so to speak, by further baking it. It's already usher. the pasakim im nefsai de balabayas. You can now you can no longer reverse what happened. It already has its status. It has its status. And not only in bittul minataris pas, I did shapira b'pittul b'bishlo. If you broke it apart and make it into crumbs, let's say, it doesn't become permissible. Then it wouldn't become permissible for further processing. What about bittul? The halacha generally is as follows. When it comes to forbidden mixtures by mistake in general, there are some exceptions to this. Generally speaking, we say forbidden mixtures that fall in by mistake are nullified in a ratio of 1:60. So if I have 60 times greater permissible liquid, for example, I have a pot of chicken soup, and by mistake a tiny bit of milk fell in, and it gets totally mixed in, it's no longer discernible. If the ratio of milk that fell into the chicken soup pot is less than 1:60, meaning that there's more than 60 times the amount of chicken soup against the milk is considered to be nullified. You're not going to taste it, you're not going to see it, it's considered like it's not there. But when it comes to the halachas of pas akum, because it's a rabbinic prohibition, the rabbis were more lenient and said that pas palter, non-pas yisrael ingredients or bread would be nullified in the majority, which means if you have the majority permissible product, then it would be still nullified. For example, when you make tuna salad, very often companies will use breadcrumbs because tuna is expensive as a commodity, as a raw material. Some tuna salads will have up to 7% breadcrumbs mixed in. So breadcrumbs, obviously, from a cost perspective, are much less expensive than tuna fish. So if you had non-pas yisrael breadcrumbs mixed in with the mayonnaise and all the other ingredients that make the tuna ready to be eaten the way it is, the breadcrumbs are no longer going to be visible; they become liquefied. So halachically, they'd be nullified because the majority is going to be the tuna fish. Now, whether or not somebody wants to be lenient about that, according to Mitzvah Chasidus, one can say, okay, I want to be stringent, but halachically it would be nullified. Okay, let's look inside. As pas akum is mixed in other foods, it's nullified in the majority. Whether it fell in its kind, another kind of bread, or another kind, whether it's liquid or whether it's dry. Even though by other rabbinic prohibitions, you need 60 times to nullify them. The pas ubibishol akum bikila, by pas akum bishol akum, the rabbis were more lenient and they said it's enough if you have the majority permissible product against it. As long as the bread is no longer discernible, like the example I gave you in the tuna salad, you're not going to see the breadcrumbs anymore, and therefore you can get into the whole discussion and say it's considered to be nullified. If you can see the pieces, even though they're small pieces, it's still going to be prohibited. Halacha chaf aleph, and then we're going to talk about pretzels. I'll tell you about how they're made too. What about the taste of pasakim bread baked by a non-Jew? It's absorbed in a vessel. The prohibition of pasakim only refers to the actual visible bread in front of you. We don't have to be stringent and say we have to kosherize vessels from an absorption of pasakim. That far we didn't go. The rabbis didn't go that far. Therefore, we're allowed to eat from a vessel that produced the food that was pasakum. So, for example, you go to a kosher pot pretzel factory, it's not pas yisrael. It's baking pretzels all day long. By the way, these machines run all day long. They feed all America, located in Pennsylvania. Okay, they feed all America. And they have all different die cutters. The same dough, primarily. I'll explain to you what that is. That's the next part. So now, what happens is you have a dough. Let me give you like an imaginary visual of how this works. They have machines that actually make the dough. The dough for pretzels is very thick. It's a viscous dough. And then it goes into a hopper, which is a receiving vessel. And that receiving vessel, gravity feeds it down. Then you have this long cylinder that has, well, the die cutter. It has receptacle for the shape of the pretzel that it wants. Okay. And it's recess mold, which means it's a recess, right? So let's say I'm going to make pretzels in the shape of, the kind of like the, I don't know how to explain that, but you know what I mean, okay? Or I want to make the nuggets, right? They have these different die cutters. They just change the die cutter. It fits into a certain place, and then that particular dough falls into the die cutter, and it drops it on a depositor, and that line then feeds it into an oven, and it bakes, and then they have a cooling line, then pack it. Now the rest of the dough that's around the webbing around the die cutter that gets recycled because it's good product. So they have a way of capturing that dough. They pull it to the side, and then they dump it back into the, not in a nice way, but it gets fed back into the product because it's good product. That's how it works. So because of this system, the way the halacha is, to make pasta pretzels is very easy. All I have to do is send a mashgiach somewhere in the middle of Pennsylvania and say, get there at 6 o'clock in the morning before they start up the ovens, and turn on the oven for everything that's going to be baked today, and everything that they bake in that oven, which could be hundreds of thousands of pounds of product, will be pasta Yisroel. And that's how these Hamish companies make pasta Yisroel pretzels. They have a mashgiach going down to these places, and these places are under the OK Hashgacha or another national Hashgacha, and they make sure it's a kosher power factory, and that's all. Very simple. To make kosher power pasta pretzels just means sending down a rabbi and getting a report, and taking down the lot numbers, whatever, and using different packaging, of course, to back the final product. That's how that works. Now, all right, to catch my breath. You want to hear how bagels are made?
Yeah.
Oh, how bagels are made. So, large factories rely on machinery very often to make their product. So they do the stages of production in various spaces. They'll have a designated space, which is known as the mixing room, which mixes up all the ingredients, the batching. So let's say this particular recipe of 1,000 pounds of dough, which is what they use, very high increments, but they have large machines that do this, requires, let's say, I'm just making up numbers, let's say it requires X amount of sugar, X amount of salt, X amount of flavoring, and they have it all dosed out, measured out in a bag. And then they'll have the water and the flour automatically pumped and fed into a mixer. And then they'll hand dump this particular spice and mix into the mix. It gets mixed into a dough, and then it gets electronically bucket elevator lifted up into a receptacle like a hopper, and that hopper will then dose it down onto a receiving belt as little logs, like around, I would say, probably like 8 inches long, thick logs. And then they run down a conveyor belt, and it's like a superhighway. After running down for about 10 feet, this particular belt splits off into 5. So they'll have those, they call them slugs, excuse the term, but they're like the long things. And then they have them run down separate lanes, and then they run them through various brushes that massage the dough into the shape of a circle. So it'll start to curl it until it gets fully around, and then they pat it so it looks very nice and uniform and everything. And then they keep running it down another line. Then they coat it with corn flour to dust it, and then they run it on boards, automatically cut on boards, and then it goes onto a rack, and then it gets electronically sent into a proofer. It has to sit in a proofer for about 12 hours, sometimes more, and then from there it's ready to be baked. Then it gets conveyor belt sent onto what's called a tunnel oven, which is a very long oven, very wide, could be like 16 feet, 20 feet wide, could be like 90 feet long, with the size of a house. And it's a very slow headspace. So that means that the belt that's moving the product on the top of the oven is not maybe like 6 inches max. And I'll run it through there. And a proper bagel is made in such a way where they first boil it briefly before they bake it. That's what gives you the effect of a crispy outside and a deliciously soft inside. That's what's called, that's the mouthfeel that people really crave. And they also have what's called a seeder right before it actually goes into the oven. After it's wet, they spray it with something so that the seed, whether it's going to be it's like an egg wash. They'll use, let's say, poppy seed or whatever it is, everything bagel, whatever all the the toppings, they get sprayed on there. Whatever falls off the bagel gets recovered and resent back on. Again, they have a recovery system because every company has rework. Goes into the oven, it bakes for about 8 minutes, comes out, and then it goes into a deep freezer. Isn't that delicious? Huh? That's how you make millions of bagels a day. No, I'm kidding. They make a few 100,000 a day, but it's quite fascinating. Yeah, it's all great and fine as long as the machinery doesn't break down. So if you get a little glitch, so all these companies have machine shops, they have mechanics on staff because you cannot afford a breakdown. A breakdown for one day could mean like 200,000, 250,000 bagels not made. It's a big thing. So anyway, they have large freezers as well for the process. But if you wanted a tour for a bagel, like a bagel factory, I have a factory in Long Island, about an hour and 15 minutes away. Someone wants to arrange the whole transportation thing and everything, I could ask the company for permission if that would be possible. It is a cool process, yes. It's a cool process, yeah, it's very, very cool. Okay, yeah,
How
question.
big are the freezers?
Sorry?
How big are the freezers?
So the freezers, the way it works in a freezer is the freezers are very tall. The freezers are usually 5 stories tall because they want to have a lot of headspace to be able to store the pallets. A pallet is a huge box, basically, which has on a piece of wood, which is a pallet. And they sell everything by the pallet. And they have these forklifts that can go up to 5 stories high. They're very expensive forklifts, and forklifts themselves can cost sometimes a few $1,000. And they go all the way up, and then they keep them on racks. And they store probably, I mean, I don't know exactly, but probably 5 to 10 truckloads of product in their freezer at any given time. Because when they're selling product out, they're usually selling it by the truckload, which equals 52 pallets. Depending on how tall the pallets are, yeah. So if the food being cooked or baked is raw, the answer is no. But if let's say it's bread that's already baked by a Jew, they would be allowed to toast it. But from a systems perspective, from an advisor, we wouldn't advise them to do that because then they're going to come to fry an egg, and you're gonna have a problem. So as a policy, I don't allow the non-Jewish cleaning help even to plug in the water urn because I don't want her to get used to touching any fires. But halachically, if she did turn on the urn, water is something you can drink without being cooked. It wouldn't be a problem. It's not advisable. You have to set a healthy boundary. Once the food's already cooked and made bishul Yisroel, a non-Jew is allowed to warm it up in a kosher, responsible manner, but it's not advisable because to lead to problems. Yeah. So the answer is there are 2 opinions about it. From the strict letter of law, can be any Jew, any person who's Jewish, as long as you know they did it, or a religious person knows they did it. It's better it should be a religious Jew if you have the option. So, for example, I always advise, it's a common question. You're going home and let's say I'm cooking rice in a kosher pot, a burner, that's kosher rice. I took care of all the issues. My mother, who's not religious, wants to stir the food for me or turn on the fire. I would advise the girls not to tell the mother, hey, don't turn it on. You didn't go to Makom and you're not religious. I would just say, go sleep in the doghouse tonight. That's not a good idea. But rather, let her turn it on. And then when she's not in the kitchen, you can raise the flame if you want to make it more mahudr, but in a discreet manner, not to make her feel bad. Because halachically, from the strict letter of the law, there is what to be lenient upon. But if you can do it better, you do it better. So another example, this would be in a Chabad house. So I had this question from my brother. He had someone in his Chabad house. He used to come early in the morning, and I think the kitchen was the only one status. I think it was all fleshik. So they were cooking parve eggs. I was making eggs in the morning. A religious, and I'm not a traditional Jew, but not fully religious, not Shabbat Shabbat. So he asked me about turning on the fire. I said, in the Chabad house, it's his house, and he's coming there. He's being mekadev that way, and he's davening English in the minyan. It's part of his Yiddishkeit. You can let him do it, but in your own house, you shouldn't let him do it. So every situation is a little bit different. So the answer in general is that ideally, if you have choices, we would say to do better. But if you have no other choice, to be lenient. Yeah.
If you turn the flame up, can you still turn it back down?
Yeah, because the fire is still there, the koyach is still there. As long as it's still on, yeah. Not turned off. And by the way, I'll say another interesting piece of information. We years ago I certified a bakery, no longer certified bakery, they closed it down, but it was a very, very expensive type of breads. I mean, they were charging. You probably have to refinance the house to buy them. I'm kidding, but it was expensive. It was exotic breads, really really well done. And yeah, but on a different level, like they had the olive bread, they had slipper dough, they had flipper bread, they had Shabbat, very, very, and it was professionally. They were pas Yisroel, and they were done in very expensive type of ovens that were very thick shelves. They had jets inside them. They would spray water as it baked to create a very crispy crust in the soft inside. It was extremely tasty. I'll tell you a story about that in a moment, but the point I want to bring out was that I tested it the oven was at 500 degrees, and I shut it off, and I locked it. I sealed it up with kosher tape. I want to see how long it's going to stay warm. Yatzilet is both, which let's say it's going to stay above 180 degrees. And it took 2 days to go below 180 degrees because it was so well insulated that the heat was trapped, and it was, very low head space, very well insulated, and that could happen. It really depends on the mechanics of the particular oven, but very long tunnel ovens also can take a day or more to cool down because you have so much space inside there, such a low head space, the heat is really trapped, so to speak. So before they work on such machinery, they may have to keep it turned down for 2 days or something like that. I had another story which is you can bring tears to someone's eyes. I got a call from a Yid in Borough Park, and he says to me, "Do you have any Pasisol bakeries in Manhattan?" I said, "Yeah, I do actually." I tell them about it. I tell them what they have. They want to know all the kind of breads that they made, exotic breads. So I said to them, "If you don't mind me asking, you're from Borough Park, they probably have more kosher bakeries there than many other locales. Why are you asking me about a bakery in Manhattan?" He says to me, his father, the Holocaust survivor. And in the Holocaust, in the camps, his father, he was saying to himself in that terrible torture that he was going through, he said he just wanted to have a piece of bread. And I was like, just hoping, longing for just a piece of bread. But now that his father survived, Baruch Hashem, and built a family, out of respect for his father, he's always looking out for new types of bread that he didn't taste yet, didn't have yet, and he brings it to his father. Very sweet, yeah. Yeah, okay. All right. Any other questions? No? Okay, let's go. Continue on. And now we're going to start the laws of Bishul Akum. This is page Samachay. I need to give this warrants a little bit of an introduction. The introduction goes as follows. They said a few weeks ago that the laws of Pasakum, Bishul Akum, Kolavakum, in this case we're really focusing on Pas and Bishul, the reason for these laws are the same, meaning the umbrella, so to speak, the top bar, the policy, it was enacted by the rabbi, as we brought down the Gemara by the Zara, as a safeguard against intermarriage. That's the primary reason, right? Now, the details of what's prohibited with regards to bread and cooked foods are different because they have a different structure. Because halacha says that bread made from the 5 grains, namely wheat, oats, spelt, rye, or barley, are inherently considered to be chosher, are considered to be of a royal stature. So even if I have a cookie, or I have, let's say, not a nice looking bread, it's still considered to be halachically of stature, and would qualify, would be under the guise and the laws of Pas Yisroel. But when it comes to Bishul Akum, foods cooked by a non-Jew, no such reasons, no such laws apply. There's different structure of laws, and they are as follows: that foods that are of a royal nature, that I'd serve at a fancy event, at a king's table, at a wedding, or at a royal feast, at a state dinner, those, if they're not edible in their raw state, have to be cooked by a Jew. For example, an apple, like apple crumble, or apple pie, or applesauce, or tzimmis, carrots, right? You cook these foods, but both carrots and apples are edible in their raw state, right? So therefore, if a non-Jew cooks carrots, it's not Bishul Akum. May not be advisable, as I said, depending on the environment, but strictly speaking, from the letter of law, it's not prohibited. On the other hand, if a non-Jew takes a potato, which you take a raw potato, you cannot bite into it. You'll have to go see the dentist. So it needs to be cooked, and if you cook it and it's prepared nicely, it's going to be something you would serve at a nice event. So then it would have to be cooked by a Jew. It requires Bishul Yisrael. So many foods fall under this category. For example, meat, chicken, fish, potatoes, whole eggplant would also fall in that category. There's other foods as well. So these foods have to be cooked with a Jew's participation. Now, the other thing interesting about this, we get into a discussion. What about if there are foods made from these ingredients, but their final stature don't look nice? For example, potato chips, one of the 4 basic food groups in the American diet. So it's coming from a potato, but in its final stage, it's really a snack food that's poison. So you're not going to go to a fancy a fancy dinner, a state event, 5,000 people, one of these state dinners, and they're not going to serve you potato chips. If they will, you won't vote for that party. You know what I mean? So it's not going to work. So it's not considered to be a chashuv, it's a snack food. So that's already a subject of rabbinic debate, because the origin of the food is of a royal nature, but its final status, its final appearance is no longer. Another thing we get into, different questions. What about Pringles? Pringles are also made from potatoes, but they're made in a different process. They're made from a dehydrated potato, where the dehydration process makes the potato not edible. And then they rehydrate it. That's why each Pringle looks the same. In a potato chip, they slice the potatoes and fry them. So each one comes out with their own personality. But the Pringle, they all look the same because they're going on a mold and they're carefully crafted to be even have more junk inside them. So the Pringle, that's why the bracha shakel, because it's dehydrated, it becomes a new entity essentially. So it's more detached from its original source of the potato. The bracha shakel, there are some rabbis that maintain the position. It's a little bit easier to say that Pringles don't have to be Bishul Yisroel because they're further removed from the original source. The bracha changes, and you also have the dehydration process, which makes it not edible. So therefore, the new entity is not a problem. But a potato chip, what do you mean? It's just a sliced potato. Yeah. Many years ago, by the way, it says in Sfarim, by the way, Erev Rosh Hashanah, you're supposed to take on a Hiddur mitzvah. Just to try to increase in our in our spiritual stock, in our spiritual bank account. It's a good time to do that, right? Check our portfolio. So I made a achlota. I'm not going to have non-Bishul Yisrael potato chips. I used to have them. Someone's already stuck on the road. I'd be delayed, and you know how it is. If you know how it is, I know how it is. You go to the rest stop, and then you see all the poison there, and you're hungry. It's hard to say no. So I made achlota. I'm not going to have this anymore, and I said it's achlota that's good for ruchnius and for gashmius. It's good for my spiritual health and my physical health. Anyway, but all kidding aside, so there are those that are more lenient about the Pringles, and they're more strict about the potato chips for that reason. Still, some people are lenient about potato chips. Rabbi Feinstein was not more about potato chips. I'm told by his students. So there's definitely reason for somebody wants to be strict about it, but there are leniencies, depending on who's asking the question. I once asked a fascinating question by a shlucha. She said to me that her family, she and her husband have in their home, they only serve Bishul Yisrael potato chips. They're strict. Okay, they lived in a place that wasn't so far from established community, could go shopping once a week to get all the Amish products. So she said, but her daughter, who's over bat mitzvah, wants to have the non-Bishul Yisrael kosher, reliably certified potato chips. What should you do? So I said to her, you're not really asking me a kashrut question. But because there are leniencies that allow it, you're asking me more of a chinuch question. What do? Because you have a family, you have the dynamics. I said you could tell your daughter that Rami and Tati, in our home, we established this kind of policy and this standard of kashrut. Your bas mitzvah, you can really choose on your own if you choose to be lenient about this. And with your friends, when you're hanging out with them, you want to buy that and eat that, you're allowed to. But we ask you out of respect not to do so in front of the other children, because we're trying to create this kind of standard, And you can choose whatever it is. So that's the answer, because it's a question. But there are different positions about the matter. So, okay, so Bishul Akum. Thinking if I have anything else to add to what I already said. Another thing that's very relevant also gets back to the question we had about eating food. In catered events, by almost all catered events, we'll have food that's already cooked. Bishul Yisrael, mashgiach sends on the fire, then it goes on these shaping dishes, and with sternum it gets reheated, it gets warmed up. So technically, again, from the strict letter of the law, a non-Jew is allowed to light the sternum because it's only heating up food that's already been cooked by the Jew. But policy-wise, when I was a mashgiach in a catered event, I wouldn't allow that because I don't want to. It's not fair to the non-Jew also to teach them. Oh, I'm teaching them the Jewish law. They're not interested. Like this, you're allowed to. This, you're not allowed to. No, the policy, uniform policy. The Jew has to turn on the fire. So I go around with one of those lighting guns and just light the fire on all the sternos because we want to keep that understanding, that clear understanding of what's going on. Additionally, the Torah teaches us that we go min akal l'kavod, just like when the Shabbos meal, we first have the fish, then we have the meat. digestively speaking, right? We go from the lighter foods to the heavier foods, right? When we tell a story, we tell a thing, and you start off getting, warming up the crowd, then you get a little bit deeper, deeper, deeper. Same thing also in halacha. So the laws of pas hakim are more lenient because we said that even those stringent have only pas yisrael. You don't have to kasher the vessels that we use to make the pas palpa product, right? You don't have to kasher the pretzel factory if it's kosher fire, just turn on the fire. But bishul akum, if I have a vessel that was used, let's say I have a pot, and roast chicken was made in there, there's all kosher ingredients, but it was turned on by a non-Jew. The food is bishul akum. I cannot eat the food. Even though there are different opinions, but the standard answer would be that you have to kasher the kelim, yes, unless there are extenuating circumstances. So it's more strict, and that's why the laws of bishul akum come after pas, because we're going in that order. So this becomes a question also. If you have, let's say, an elderly person in a house, and you have an aide that's there to help because they can't cook, they cannot turn on fires anymore, it becomes a question how to deal with the issue of the fire. So for the chayla, for the older person, they didn't have a chayla. One question, easier to deal with that. But then what about the rest of the family? Can they eat off the pots? These are things the Rav should be consulted. The Rav will guide you. There's a way to handle that, but it's a question. Okay. Now we should tell a little nicer. We have another 30 seconds. There was a chassid the Alter Rebbe. We're getting close to Yitzhak Kislev. We're telling Ma'at about the Alter Rebbe. He was traveling and he was walking on the road on the way to Lubavitch, and it was freezing winter time between it. We can't even imagine what it's like. When it's 20 degrees outside, I tell people it's a spring day in Moscow. I mean, it's like there it was bitter cold, and he's walking on the road. He's frozen. He sees a wagon's coming in the distance, so he flags them down and says, "There's a path looking at a ride. You going in my direction?" Going to Lubavitch, he said, "Well, we have no room in the front in the carriage, but if you want to sit in the back with the merchandise, you can come along." So he was glad to do that. This way, he's not standing on the ice, and he's in a little bit of a protected environment. And he comes inside, and he's carrying barrels of whiskey, mashka. So he positions the mashka barrel in the form of a bagel, and he dives in around himself in the middle to be surrounded by it. He's hoping to warm up. After a few minutes, he didn't warm up that much. He says, "Not from the place." Says, "Can I have a little drink? Can I say l'chaim?" He says, "Yeah." He says l'chaim, and he warms up. Machaya. Starts to feel the fire inside his body. It feels his limbs again. He finally gets to Lubavitch, and he sees his friends are in shul, and they're sitting around. And the Fabrengi, he says to them, "Shalom Aleichem," the whole greeting. I'm just going to make the story quick. But he says, we want to warm up spiritually, so we decide to surround ourselves in a warm environment. We come to our shul, we surround with Sfarim, we were in a nice, warm, spiritual environment. So it's a nice place to be, but it doesn't really do it. He says, it's only when you open it up and you drink some inside, you drink the words of Torah, see this, and it goes inside your system, then you feel the machaya, you feel the warmth. And then it's machaya mason, then we become revitalized. So then remind me next week, it's Hashem. It's next week is Friday's Yud Ches. I'll tell you a bunch of Bertlach on Tanya. Tanya's ACS Ason, and then there's many things to say. I started one stop, so remind me. Have a good Shabbos. And thank you, Ariella, for agreeing to write up those stories. I don't know if you know what you got into, because I have a lot of stories. Yeah, I just have to get around to it. I think it was 5 or 6 years ago, I sent out maybe 50 stories to my daughter in Israel to find that recording that was forwarded to you. Yeah.
I'll just send it back to you and you just tell me.
Yeah. Thank you again. All right. Thank you. True, eh?
Huh?
It's true.
Have you been to Moscow?
I haven't been there, but I was close. At least in Europe.
Hey, Doug, where am I sitting? You freedom, some shade out there. Can I grow some on you?
No, I don't have time for that. I'm slow.
Ditto.
We don't not use this. Don't worry, I did. You thought it was mine, and I was like, you really thought I would wear that? And then. The vest, you just left it hanging on our door. Oh. And she thought it was mine, and I was like, it's very nice, but not for me. And then I saw Abram thinking over, and I was like, do you think I would wear this?
Really, I wanted to try it on again,
Okay,
but.
bathroom here, yeah,
So maybe.
after work, so I work until 2. And, yeah, and then I have a bunch of errands to get done, so, not, yeah, not before Jarvis.
Like this should be fine, I mean, that's.
But. Yes, once the check is something available, but Jarvis, I'll be, yeah,
That's the story for everyone.
I love working in film too.
Oh. The milk is off? Oh. You know, or like, what is that?
It's bad.
I think it's bad. You really love to eat it. Huh?
Amy, would you write the lyrics to your song? I have parts of it stuck in my head and I have it up in that. Like, it's gonna be in my head, I might as well have it.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.